Daniel Brooks slammed the last box onto his truck bed so hard the whole vehicle shook, and then he just stood there, hands gripping the tailgate, knuckles, white jaw locked, staring at nothing. 6 boxes. 3 years of friendship. Gone. Just like everything else in his life. He yanked open the driver's door, threw himself into the seat, and drove, not because he was ready, but because standing still hurt worse than moving. He was going to drop the boxes, say nothing, and disappear. Clean. Fast. No conversations. No eye contact. No people. That was the plan. Then a woman he had never seen before opened the door, looked straight through every wall he had spent 3 years building, and said 4 words that stopped him cold. "Are you actually okay?" Nobody had asked him that, not once, not in 3 years. And God help him he didn't know the answer. Drop your city in the comments right now. I want to see how far this story travels. And if it already hit something in your chest, hit subscribe. Because what happens next will change the way you see everything. The morning Daniel Brooks decided to return Michael Turner's boxes was the same morning he burned the pancakes, snapped at his 7-year-old daughter for asking a perfectly reasonable question, and sat alone in his truck for 11 minutes in his own driveway because he couldn't convince his body to move. Emma had asked, "Daddy, are we going to be okay?" He had said, "Of course we are, baby." He had said it the way men say things they're not sure they believe, quickly, firmly, with their jaw set just tight enough that nobody asks a follow-up question. Then he went to the kitchen, scraped the blackened pancakes into the trash, poured her a bowl of cereal, kissed the top of her head, and told her he'd be back before lunch. He wasn't even sure that was true. Daniel was 35 years old and he felt 60. Not 60 in the wise, settled grandfather, rocking on the porch kind of way. 60 in the way a truck feels when it's been driven hard on bad roads for too long without maintenance still running. But you can hear things grinding that shouldn't be grinding, and you try not to think about what happens if you push it much harder. He had been a husband. Then he wasn't. He had been part of something, a marriage, a plan, a future, and then one ordinary Tuesday 3 years ago, the whole architecture of his life came apart, and he was left standing in a hospital corridor holding a paper cup of terrible coffee, being told by a doctor, who looked barely old enough to shave, that his wife Lauren wasn't going to make it through the night. A brain aneurysm. That's what they called it. Like they could name the thing that took her, and somehow that naming would make it smaller. It didn't make it smaller. It made everything else smaller. It made him smaller, or at least it made him feel that way. And for 3 years, Daniel Brooks had been living in that smallness, wearing it like a coat he couldn't figure out how to take off. He got up every morning. He made Emma's breakfast, or he tried to. He dropped her at school. He went to his job at Waverly Auto Parts on Route 40, where he managed inventory and talked to nobody more than he had to. He picked Emma up. He made dinner. He helped with homework. He put her to bed. He sat in the dark living room for an hour watching television he couldn't have told you the name of if you'd put a gun to his head. And then he did it again. That was his life. Not bad. Not dramatic. Just reduced. Like a sauce cooked down too long until all the flavor was gone, and what was left was just something thick and functional that got you through the day. The boxes in his truck had been sitting in his garage for almost 2 months. Michael Turner was one of those friends from before the hospital, before the grief, before Daniel became whoever he was now. They'd known each other since their early 20s, had worked together briefly at a machine shop in Murfreesboro, had watched football together on Sunday afternoons, had been the kind of friends who didn't talk every week, but picked up exactly where they left off when they did. After Lauren died, Michael had been there, not in a big dramatic way, but in the way that mattered. He showed up with groceries that first week. He sat with Daniel in that dark living room and didn't try to fill the silence with words. He took Emma to the park a few times when Daniel could barely get off the couch. But over the past year, something had shifted between them. Michael had taken a job offer in Denver. Things got complicated the way things get complicated when life pulls people in different directions, and neither one of them is in the right place to hold on. The boxes were remnants of better days. Tools Michael had left at Daniel's place. Some books. A leather jacket, a few things from a camping trip they'd taken 3 summers ago, back when Daniel was still the kind of man who went on camping trips. Michael had texted twice asking about them. Daniel had put off dealing with it for 2 months. This morning, for reasons he couldn't fully explain, maybe because Emma had looked at him over her cereal bowl with those eyes that were too much like Lauren's, too full of questions he didn't have answers to. Daniel had loaded the boxes into his truck and decided today was the day. He plugged the Turner family address into his phone. 15 minutes across town. Michael had mentioned his mother still lived there, that he'd be back in Nashville in a few weeks. Simple. Quick. In and out. He told himself it would feel good to get it done, to clear something off the list, to do one small, simple thing without screwing it up. The Turner house was a pale yellow 2-story on a quiet street lined with oak trees. The kind of neighborhood that felt like it had been the same for 30 years, not wealthy, but cared for. Window boxes with geraniums, a porch with a wooden bench, a car in the driveway that was clean, but old. Daniel pulled up, cut the engine, and sat there for a moment. He almost texted Michael, "Hey, dropping your stuff off at your mom's, hope that's cool." But he'd already texted that the night before, and Michael had said yes, that was fine, his sister would be home. His sister. Daniel hadn't thought much about that. He'd met Michael's younger brother once, years ago. He didn't remember ever hearing much about a sister. He climbed out of this truck. He grabbed as many boxes as he could carry, which turned out to be 3 stacked badly, the top one threatening to slide, and he walked up the front porch steps. He knocked with his elbow because his hands were full. He waited. He shifted the boxes. The top one slid an inch. He caught it with his chin, which was not his most dignified moment. The door opened, and that was when everything got complicated in a way Daniel could not have predicted, with a calendar, a map, and a year's worth of preparation. The woman who opened the door was not what he expected. He hadn't expected anything really, or rather, he'd expected a version of Michael. Someone with Michael's rangy build and easy smile and quick eyes. He'd expected someone who would see the boxes and say, "Oh great, come in. Just set those down anywhere," the kind of efficient, frictionless transaction that gets you back in your truck in 4 minutes. Instead, the woman who opened the door stopped. She didn't look at the boxes. She looked at him. She was around 30, dark hair pulled back in a loose knot, a few strands falling around her face. She was wearing jeans and a rust-colored sweater, and she was a full-figured woman, the kind that some people look straight through or look at wrong or don't see clearly at all. But there was a quality to the way she stood in that doorway, easy grounded, like she was entirely comfortable taking up the space she occupied, that made Daniel feel strangely like the one who was unsure of where he stood. She tilted her head, her eyes dark brown, sharp, genuinely seeing in a way that made his skin feel too thin, moved from his face to the boxes to his face again. And then she said it. "You look like someone carrying more than just those boxes." Daniel opened his mouth, closed it. He'd been ready for, "Oh, you must be Daniel. Michael mentioned you, or just set those down on the porch. Thanks so much." He had not been ready for someone to look at him for 3 seconds and say something that precise, that accurate, that quietly devastating. I'm Daniel," he managed. "Daniel Brooks. I've got Michael's stuff. He said someone would be home." "He told me," she said. "I'm Olivia, his sister." She pushed the door open wider. "Come in. You look like you could use a minute to put those down somewhere other than your chin." "I had it under control," Daniel said. "You absolutely did not," Olivia said, but she was smiling when she said it, not meanly, not like she was scoring a point, just honestly. Like she thought honesty was normal, like it was something people did as a matter of course. He followed her inside. The living room was warm, family photos on the walls, books on a shelf that actually looked red. A dog somewhere deeper in the house made a brief investigative noise, and then apparently decided Daniel wasn't worth the effort. "You can set those on the floor by the couch," Olivia said. "Michael's going to come get everything when he's back in 3 weeks. He'd planned to come himself today, but something came up in Denver. That's fine, Daniel said. I just wanted to get it done. He set the boxes down, careful, controlled, nothing like the graceless arrival on the porch, and straightened up. He should have said nice to meet you and walked back out to get the other 3 boxes. He didn't, because Olivia was already moving toward the kitchen and saying over her shoulder with the kind of easy certainty that doesn't ask permission, "You drink coffee, I just made a pot." "I shouldn't," Daniel started. "That's not what I asked," she said, still moving. "Do you drink coffee?" "Yes." "Then come on." He got the other 3 boxes from the truck first, set them down with the others, and then, for reasons he would spend the next several weeks trying to clearly articulate, he walked into Olivia Turner's kitchen and sat down at her table. She poured 2 mugs without asking how he took his, then set a small container of cream and a sugar bowl on the table and sat across from him, letting him do whatever he wanted with it. He took it black, she noticed. "My brother says you two go back a long way," she said. "Since about 2012, Daniel said. "We worked together. Machine shop." "You still doing that?" "No, I manage inventory for an auto parts place now." "But you like the machine shop better?" It wasn't a question. He looked up. "Michael tell you that?" he asked. "No," she said. "The way you said machine shop and then auto parts place told me that." He stared at her. "You do this with everyone?" he asked. "Do what? Just read people like that?" Olivia picked up her mug. "I work at a community center. I spend a lot of time with people who are going through things. You get good at hearing what people aren't saying. And what am I not saying?" The question came out before he could decide whether or not he actually wanted to ask it. Olivia looked at him steadily, not like she was building to something, like she was thinking about how to be both honest and kind at the same time. And unlike most people, she was actually capable of doing both. "That you're tired," she said, "not the kind you fix with sleep, the other kind." The kitchen was quiet. Outside, a car went past. Daniel looked down at his mug and said nothing, because there was nothing to say that wasn't going to crack something open. He stayed for 40 minutes. He didn't plan to. He was acutely aware somewhere in the back of his mind that this was the longest conversation he'd had with another adult that wasn't about inventory management or school pickup schedules in longer than he could easily calculate. He didn't talk about Lauren, not directly, but Olivia had a way of asking questions that moved around the edges of things, not pushing into the wound, just acknowledging that it existed. She asked about Emma, and something in the way she asked it not. Oh, that must be so hard. The way people always said it, the way that somehow always made him feel like he was supposed to feel worse, but just genuine warm curiosity, like Emma was a person she was already interested in. "She sounds like she's got her head on straight," Olivia said. "She's smarter than me," Daniel said. "She's been smarter than me since she was 4. "That tracks," Olivia said. "Some kids just come out knowing things." "She asked me this morning if we were going to be okay." He said it before he'd decided to say it, and once it was out, he felt exposed in a way that made him want to pick up his truck keys and end the conversation immediately. Instead, he kept going, and I told her yes, of course, and she believed me. He exhaled. "I don't know why she believes me. I'm not sure I believe me." Olivia didn't rush to fill that space with reassurance. She didn't say, "Of course you're going to be okay or things will get better." She just let it sit there for a moment the way you let something real sit respectfully. Then she said, "Do you think she's asking because she's worried or because she wants to hear you say it?" Daniel blinked. He hadn't thought about it that way. "I think," he said slowly, "she knows the difference. She's 7 and she already knows the difference." Then she asked because she needed to hear it, Olivia said. "Even if you're not all the way sure yet, she needed to know you're still trying, that you haven't given up." "I haven't given up. I can see that," she said, and she said it plainly, like a fact, not like a compliment, not like something she was handing him to make him feel better, like something she'd assessed and confirmed. You're still here. You're still doing it. That counts. He looked at her across that kitchen table, and he felt something shift barely just a fraction somewhere in the vicinity of his chest. He recognized it distantly, the way you recognize a song you haven't heard in years. Unfamiliar, because it had been absent so long. But underneath that unfamiliarity still there, the faint, rusty, terrifying sensation of not being entirely alone. He picked up his keys. "I should go," he said. "Emma's home." "You said she's 7, Olivia said. "Is she alone?" "My neighbor is with her. Mrs. Callahan. It's fine. But I told her I'd be back before lunch." "Go," Olivia said, standing. "She needs her dad." He nodded. He walked to the door. He put his hand on the frame. He turned back. "You said you work at a community center," he asked. "Mm-hmm. The Riverside Community Center on 4th. I do family services mostly, helping people find resources, connect with programs." She paused. "We have a little workshop too. Repair and build, it's a small program, but people like it. We've been trying to get it going properly for a while." She tilted her head. "Why?" "Just." He stopped. "No reason." "Okay," she said, and she didn't push. He left. He drove 3 blocks and pulled over and sat in his truck. He didn't know what had happened in that kitchen. He didn't have language for it. He hadn't cried. He hadn't done anything dramatic or revelatory or movie scene. He'd sat across from a woman he'd never met and had a conversation, and something in that conversation had gone to a place inside him that he hadn't let anything near in 3 years. His phone buzzed. "Emma." "Daddy? When are you coming home? We're out of orange juice." He looked at that text for a long moment. Then he typed back, "On my way, baby. We'll get OJ on the way home. Love you." He pulled back onto the road. But he already knew he was going to think about Olivia Turner for the rest of the day. And the day after that. And the day after that. He didn't call the community center that week. He thought about it. He thought about it the way you think about a door, when you're not sure what's on the other side, aware of it, circling it, finding reasons to walk past it and not open it. He was fine. He was doing fine. He told himself this firmly while burning dinner on Thursday. He told himself this while lying awake at 2 a.m. on Friday, listening to the house be quiet in that specific way that houses are quiet when someone is missing from them. He told himself this while watching Emma draw pictures at the kitchen table on Saturday morning, her small face concentrated and serious, and thinking she deserves more than this reduced version of me. She deserves someone who still has something to offer. On Sunday, he went out to the garage. The garage had been off limits in a way. Not literally he parked there, he grabbed tools from it, but the corner of it, the back corner where his father's old workbench stood, where he'd spent countless hours as a kid learning to take things apart and put them back together, that corner he'd avoided. There was an old engine block on that bench, a '67 Mustang project he'd started 2 years before Lauren died and hadn't touched since. He stood in front of it for a long time. He picked up a wrench. He turned it over in his hand. He set it back down. He went inside and picked up his phone and looked up the Riverside Community Center on 4th. A website with photos. Families, kids, an older man at a workbench, surrounded by other people. All of them looking at something he'd apparently just fixed, all of them grinning. He stared at that photo. He closed the browser. He opened it again. He found a number. He saved it to his phone and then talked himself out of calling it 3 times before Monday morning, when standing in the parking lot of Waverly Auto Parts, with 20 minutes before his shift started, he called it. It rang twice. "Riverside Community Center, this is Olivia." He nearly hung up. "Hi," he said. It's Daniel Brooks. We met Saturday. I returned some boxes to your—" "I remember you," she said, and there was something warm in her voice, not surprised, just present. "How's Emma?" "She got her orange juice," he said. A pause. Then she laughed, a real laugh, quick and genuine, and something in Daniel's chest unknotted just a little. "What can I do for you, Daniel?" she asked. You mentioned a workshop, he said, at the center. I did. I'm pretty good with engines, he said, and machines. I spent a long time with them when I was younger. I don't know if that's... He stopped. I don't know if you're still looking for someone. I don't know what that would even look like. I just... Come by Wednesday afternoon, Olivia said. 4 o'clock. I'll show you the space. I work until 3:30. Then come at 4:30. He exhaled. Okay, he said. Okay, she said. We'll see you then. He hung up. He sat in the parking lot. He thought about Olivia Turner saying, "We'll see you then," in that uncomplicated way, like it was settled, like she had no doubt he'd show up, and he understood with uncomfortable clarity that the reason he'd made this call was because for the first time in 3 years, someone had looked at him and seen, not the grief, not the gap, not the man shaped by loss, but something still worth seeing. He was terrified. He was going to show up Wednesday at 4:30. For the first time in as long as he could remember, both of those things were true at the same time. And he wasn't entirely sure what to do with that. But he was done standing in his driveway for 11 minutes, unable to move. He was done returning boxes and walking away from doors that might be worth opening. Wednesday came faster than Daniel expected and slower than he could stand. He changed his shirt 3 times before leaving the house. Not because he cared about impressing anyone, that was what he told himself firmly while pulling the 3rd shirt over his head, but because the first one had a grease stain he hadn't noticed until he was halfway out the door. And the second one was the one Lauren had bought him for his birthday, the year before she died, and he couldn't wear that one. Not today. Not to something that felt like it might matter. He dropped Emma at Mrs. Callahan's with 45 minutes to spare, and then drove past the Riverside Community Center twice before pulling into the parking lot. He sat in his truck for 4 minutes. He thought about leaving. He thought about texting some excuse, something came up, Emma's sick maybe next week, and driving home and sitting in his garage, staring at that Mustang engine block until the feeling went away. Then he thought about Emma asking if they were going to be okay. He got out of the truck. The front desk was staffed by a young guy in his early 20s who looked up and said, "You here for the workshop?" "I'm looking for Olivia Turner," Daniel said. "She's in the back, down the hall, last door on the left. She said to send you straight through." She had told them he was coming. She had expected him. He didn't know why that made his throat feel tight, but it did. He walked down the hall. It was a long corridor with bulletin boards on both sides. Flyers for job placement programs, childcare resources, a veterans support group that met Tuesdays at 6, a notice about free tax preparation in February. Real things, practical things, the kind of infrastructure that held lives together when lives were coming apart at the seams. He pushed open the last door on the left. The workshop was not impressive by any objective measure. It was a mid-sized room with 4 long workbenches, a wall of pegboards holding tools in various states of organization, and a concrete floor that had been swept recently, but still carried the ghost of old grease and sawdust. Overhead fluorescent lighting. A window on the far wall with decent natural light. A space heater in the corner that was working hard. Olivia was standing at one of the benches with a man Daniel put somewhere in his late 50s. Weathered face, one hand resting on the bench, the other arm ending at the elbow. They were both looking at a small engine, and Olivia was saying something quietly, and the man was nodding with the concentrated look of someone trying very hard to hold on to information. She looked up when Daniel came in. "You actually came," she said. "You sound surprised," Daniel said. "I'm not," she said. "I'm glad." She straightened and turned to the man beside her. "Ray, this is Daniel. He's the guy I told you about. Daniel, this is Ray Kettner. He's been coming in on Wednesdays for a month." Ray Kettner looked at Daniel with eyes that had seen things and said so. He extended his right hand, the intact one, and Daniel shook it. "She told you about me," Daniel said to Olivia. "I told Ray we might be getting some help with the mechanical side of things," Olivia said. "The engine work is a little beyond what I can teach." "What do you know about engines?" Daniel asked her. "Enough to know I don't know enough," she said, "which puts me ahead of where I started." Ray made a sound that might have been a laugh. "She's honest," Ray said to Daniel. "I'll give her that." "She is," Daniel agreed before he'd fully thought about whether he should agree. Olivia caught that. He could tell by the way her mouth did something brief and controlled, like she was filing it away. "Come look at this," she said, and moved aside to make room at the bench. The engine was a small gas unit, the kind you'd pull out of a riding lawnmower. Basic mechanics, nothing exotic. But Ray had been trying to diagnose a carburetor issue and gotten turned around, and someone had given him a repair manual that was written for someone with 2 functioning hands and had not accounted for the creative problem-solving required when you only had one. Daniel looked at the engine. He looked at Ray. He picked up a screwdriver from the pegboard without asking and said, "Okay, walk me through what you already figured out." Ray blinked. "You want me to?" "You've been working on this for a month," Daniel said. "You know something. What do you know?" Ray stared at him for a second. Then he straightened up a little, and something shifted in how he was standing, subtler, harder to name, but real. He started talking, and Daniel listened. That was how it started. Not with a speech, not with a curriculum, not with Daniel explaining everything he knew about engines. With Daniel shutting up and listening to a man who needed someone to believe he already had something worth saying. Olivia stood back, and when Daniel glanced at her, she was watching him with an expression he couldn't fully decode, something careful and warm, and maybe a little bit like relief. He looked away before it meant too much. He stayed for 2 hours. When he finally left, Ray shook his hand again at the door and said, "Same time next week." Daniel looked at him. Then he looked back down the hall toward the workshop. "Yeah," he said. "Same time next week." He drove to pick up Emma, and she immediately said, "You smell like motor oil." "That's a good smell," Daniel said. Emma considered this with the gravity of a federal judge. "It smells like the garage," she said. "The good part of the garage." "Yeah," Daniel said. "It does." He didn't say anything else, but something had loosened in his shoulders that had been locked down so long he'd forgotten it was supposed to move. The week after that, 2 more people showed up to the workshop. A woman named Denise, whose husband had left, and who was trying to learn to do her own car maintenance because she couldn't afford to keep paying a mechanic. And a 23-year-old named Marcus, who had been laid off from a manufacturing job and was trying to build something on his resume that didn't exist yet. Daniel showed Denise how to check her own oil change a tire and identify the sounds an engine makes when something's wrong before it becomes something expensive. He showed Marcus how to disassemble and reassemble a carburetor with his eyes closed, almost literally, because Daniel believed you had to feel what you were doing, had to understand the machine. The way you understood a conversation by what it was telling you, not just what it looked like on the surface. Marcus called him coach by the 3rd session. Daniel told him not to. Marcus kept doing it anyway. Olivia came by the workshop at the end of each session. She checked in with people, made notes in a small spiral-bound book she carried everywhere, and occasionally leaned in the doorway and watched, not hovering, not interfering, just present in that grounded way she had. After the 4th Wednesday, she stopped by while Daniel was locking up the tool cabinet and said, "You're good at this." "It's just mechanics," Daniel said. "I'm not talking about the mechanics," she said. He kept his eyes on the cabinet. "You have to listen to people," he said. "That's most of it. You have to listen before you start telling them anything." "That's not something most people know how to do," she said. "I had a good teacher," he said. "My dad." It was the first time he'd brought up anything before Lauren, before the grief, before the version of himself that had forgotten what he used to know. He felt it immediately. The exposure of it, the smallness of it, the way it sat between them in the quiet room. "Tell me about him," Olivia said. It wasn't a therapeutic prompt. It wasn't careful or clinical. It was just genuine, like she actually wanted to know. And so Daniel told her. He told her about his father, Thomas Brooks, who had worked at an auto shop in Bowling Green, Kentucky for 31 years and had never missed a day that wasn't a family emergency. Who had taught Daniel that a machine would tell you everything you needed to know if you were patient enough to listen? Who had sat next to Daniel in a greasy garage on Saturday mornings when Daniel was 9 years old and made him feel for the first time in his life that he was useful, that he was capable, that there was dignity in knowing how to fix things? He passed about 4 years ago, Daniel said. 6 months before Lauren. That's a lot of loss in a short window, Olivia said. Yeah, he said. It was. She didn't say she was sorry. She didn't reach for the usual language. She just let it be real, let it be heavy the way it was. My dad was the same way, she said after a moment. The one who made me feel capable, made me feel like I was supposed to take up space in the world. A beat. I miss him differently every year, like the grief changes shape. It does, Daniel said. It does change shape. They stood in the workshop with the heater clicking and the street noise faint and distant outside the window, and it was the most honest conversation Daniel had had with another human being since the hospital corridor. And there was nothing dramatic about it, no music, no revelation, just two people acknowledging that loss was real and that it changed you, and that you could still be standing after it. He drove home thinking about how she'd said I miss him differently every year, like the grief changes shape. He hadn't heard it described that way before, and it was so exactly right that he felt the accuracy of it in his sternum. He sat in his truck in his driveway for 3 minutes, not because he couldn't move, because he didn't want the drive to be over yet. That was new. It had been a very long time since he'd wanted something not to end. 3 weeks into Wednesdays, Marcus showed up with a busted transmission from a '98 Civic he was trying to get roadworthy and said, "Coach, I need your brain on this." "Stop calling me Coach," Daniel said. "Coach," Marcus said, and set the transmission on the bench. Ray was there too, working on a project of his own. He'd moved past the lawnmower engine and was now rebuilding a small generator. He had adapted his technique to use his right hand as the primary mover and his stump as a stabilizing brace. And Daniel had watched the man invent solutions in real time that no manual had ever accounted for and thought, this is what people are. This is what they do when you give them space and time and someone who doesn't look at them like they're already finished. Denise came in partway through and stood at the door and said, "Daniel, can I ask you something weird?" "Probably not weird," Daniel said without looking up from Marcus's transmission. "My kid wants to come sometime," she said. "She's 12. She's obsessed with how things work and I don't know how to help her with that." Daniel set down his wrench. He looked at Denise, who was standing with that particular tension of a parent asking something they're afraid will be a burden. "Bring her," Daniel said. "Next Wednesday, bring her." Denise's face did something complicated and grateful that she covered quickly by looking at her phone. Ray made a sound from the corner. "Getting to be a real operation," he said. "It's a workshop," Daniel said. "It's more than a workshop," Ray said, and his voice was quiet and certain. "You know it's more than a workshop." Daniel picked his wrench back up and didn't answer. But he knew Ray was right, and that knowledge sat in him like something he was only beginning to know how to carry. Olivia brought coffee to the workshop that night. She brought it in a cardboard carrier from the place 2 blocks down, 4 cups, even though there were only 3 of them left when she came by because she'd counted wrong in the optimistic direction, which was Daniel was learning entirely consistent with who she was. She handed them out and settled onto the stool near the window and said, "How'd it go today?" Ray told her about the generator. Marcus told her about the Civic. Denise told her about her daughter coming next week. And Olivia smiled, not the performed professional smile of someone doing their job, but the real one, the one that showed in her eyes before it showed anywhere else, and said, "Look at what you're building." Marcus looked around the workshop. "We built this?" "You're building it right now," she said, "every Wednesday." Later, when Ray and Marcus and Denise had gone, Olivia lingered while Daniel put tools away. She was flipping through her spiral notebook, making notes, and the workshop was comfortable in the quiet, the way rooms get comfortable when the people in them have stopped needing to perform for each other. "Denise called me today before she came in," Olivia said. She said the last 3 weeks are the first time she's felt competent at something since her husband left. Daniel didn't say anything for a moment. He hung a wrench on the pegboard. She's always been competent, he said. She just forgot. You helped her remember, Olivia said. She did that herself. Daniel. He turned. She was looking at him with that direct, unornamented attention that he was starting to recognize as simply how she engaged with the world. No pretense, no softening of things to make them easier. You know that what you're doing in here is more than teaching people about carburetors, right? He held her gaze for a second. I'm starting to figure that out, he said. She nodded, like that was enough, like she didn't need him to make it into a speech or a moment. I'll see you next week, she said, and picked up her coffee cup and her notebook and walked to the door. Olivia, he said. She stopped. He had not planned to say what he was about to say. He had been very careful for several weeks now, not to say the things he was starting to think, not to name what was shifting between them, not to put it under light where it would have to be dealt with. But there it was. Thank you, he said. For the other Saturday. For the coffee. For... He stopped. Tried again. I came over to return some boxes, and I didn't think it was going to be anything. And you didn't... He exhaled. You didn't treat me like I was someone to feel sorry for. You just talked to me. Like a person. Olivia stood in the doorway. You are a person, she said, like it was the simplest thing. After you lose someone, Daniel said, people stop treating you like one for a while. They treat you like a category, a widower, a single dad, something to handle carefully. He shook his head. You just talked to me. She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, I saw someone who was exhausted and hadn't been asked the right question in a long time. What's the right question? Not whether you need anything, she said. Not what you're going through. Just who were you before it got hard? What did you love? What did you know how to do before you forgot? He stared at her. You asked me about the machine shop, he said. And you lit up, she said simply. You've been lit up every Wednesday since. The heater clicked. The fluorescent light hummed. Somewhere outside, a dog was barking at something with great conviction. I'll see you next week, Olivia said again. And she left. And Daniel stood alone in the workshop in the particular silence of someone who has just had something true said about them and felt for the first time in a very long time that the version of him that used to exist, the one who knew things and loved things and had something to offer, was not gone, just buried. And getting slowly, carefully, stubbornly dug out. He turned off the lights. He locked the door. He walked down the long corridor with the bulletin boards and out into the night. He didn't sit in his truck for 3 minutes this time. He sat for 7. Not because he was stuck, because he was thinking about what Olivia had said and what it meant, and what he was going to do with the fact that a woman he had met entirely by accident on a Saturday morning, when he'd expected nothing, had over the course of a month of Wednesday afternoons and 1 cup of kitchen coffee become someone he thought about. Not the way you think about a problem, not the way you think about the past. The way you think about something you're afraid to want, because wanting things has cost you before, and the math of it, the risk of it lives in your body as a physical thing, a tension in the chest, a held breath you've been holding for 3 years, but also the way you think about something that might be worth the risk anyway. He started the truck. He drove to pick up Emma from Mrs. Callahan's, and his daughter climbed into the back seat with her backpack and her small certain presents and said, "Did you go to the workshop again?" "Yeah," Daniel said. "Do you like it?" Emma asked. He checked the rearview mirror. She was watching him with those eyes, Lauren's eyes, his daughter's eyes, eyes that had been asking the truth of him since she was old enough to ask anything. "Yeah," he said again. "I really do." Emma nodded like this was important information she had been waiting to receive. "Good," she said. "You seem better on Wednesday nights." He felt something squeeze in his chest so hard he had to clear his throat. "Do I?" he managed. "Yeah," Emma said. "You hum." "I hum." "When you cook dinner after Wednesdays," she said. "You hum. You don't do that other days." He turned back to the road. He didn't trust himself to speak for a second. "I didn't know that," he said finally. "I know," Emma said, already looking at her book. "That's why I told you." He drove in silence and thought about Olivia Turner, and about humming, and about the strange, terrifying, tentative way that life could start to find its way back into a house that had been quiet for too long. He thought about the day he'd almost not knocked on that door. The day he'd stood on that porch, with his arms full of someone else's past, and almost turned around. Almost driven home. Almost chosen the safe, smaller thing one more time. And he thought that if he'd loaded those boxes back in his truck and found some excuse and never knocked, he would have driven away from something that was slowly giving him back to himself. Not all at once, not dramatically, not in any of the ways it happened in the stories you were supposed to tell about grief and recovery. Just Wednesday by Wednesday, conversation by conversation, one person at a time, remembering something true about who they still were. That Friday, Michael Turner called. "Hey," Michael said. "My mom said you came by and met Olivia." "Yeah," Daniel said. "She let me in. We had coffee." A pause. "You had coffee with my sister. She made a pot," Daniel said. "It seemed rude to say no." Another pause, longer. "Daniel," Michael said, and his voice had shifted into something careful. "What?" "Nothing," Michael said. "Just Olivia's good people. She's been through some stuff too. She doesn't do things halfway. I'm just saying." Daniel was quiet. "I don't know what you're saying, Michael," he said. "Yes, you do," Michael said. He did. He hung up 15 minutes later after they'd talked about other things. Denver, the weather, whether the Titans had any hope this season, and he sat with the phone in his hand and thought about what Michael was not quite saying, which was, be careful with her, and be careful with yourself, and don't do this unless you mean it, because she's my sister and you're my friend, and the stakes here are real. He understood that. He also understood with a clarity that surprised him that the question wasn't whether he meant it. The question was whether he was ready to say so. Whether the version of him that was being slowly excavated from under 3 years of grief and function and forward motion was ready to try. He didn't know. He thought about Emma saying you hum on Wednesday nights and not knowing she'd noticed. He thought about Ray Kettner adapting in real time, inventing solutions, refusing to be finished. He thought about Olivia saying, "Who were you before it got hard?" and meaning it as an invitation, not an accusation. He put his phone down. He went to the garage. He stood at the back corner at his father's old workbench in front of the '67 Mustang engine block that had been sitting untouched for 5 years. He picked up the wrench. He didn't set it back down. He worked for 2 hours in the cold garage with the single overhead bulb casting yellow light on metal that had been waiting patient as metal always is indifferent and ready for someone to come back to it. When he finally stopped, his hands were dirty and his back hurt, and the engine was still far from running. But he had started. He had actually started. And starting, he was beginning to understand, was not the small thing he'd always told himself it was. Starting was the whole battle. Starting was what it cost. Starting was the thing that everything else depended on. He washed his hands at the utility sink and turned off the light and went inside. Emma was asleep. He stood in her doorway for a moment, watching her breathe, this small, ferocious person who had kept him in the world when he wasn't sure he wanted to be in it. "We're going to be okay," he said quietly, to no one, to her sleeping shape, to the room, to himself. And this time, for the first time, he almost believed it. The engine hummed for the first time on a Thursday morning in October, and Daniel stood in his garage with grease on his forearms, and something lodged in his throat that he couldn't name for a full 30 seconds. It was just an engine, a 50-year-old block of metal and valves and timing that he had been coaxing back to life for 6 weeks. It wasn't a miracle. It wasn't profound. But when it turned over and caught and settled into that low, even idle, Daniel put both hands on the bench and let out a breath he felt like he'd been holding since before his father died. Emma heard it from inside the house and came to the garage door in her pajamas and said, "Daddy, is that your car?" "Not yet," he said. "But it's getting there." She looked at the engine. She looked at him. "You look happy," she said, like it was an observation she was reporting to someone in her head logging for future reference. "I am," he said. She went back inside. He stood there for another minute listening to the engine run and thought about Olivia. He'd been thinking about Olivia with increasing frequency and decreasing ability to rationalize it as anything other than what it was. It wasn't gratitude. It wasn't convenience. It wasn't the byproduct of proximity and routine. It was the specific, inconvenient, terrifying business of one person mattering to another, and he had run out of ways to tell himself otherwise. He called Michael that night, not to talk about Olivia. That was not how he opened the conversation. He opened it with football with the Titans, with a game from the previous Sunday that neither of them had watched particularly closely. But Michael had known him for 13 years, and after 11 minutes of football he said, "What's actually going on?" Daniel was quiet for a moment. "I've been going to the community center," he said, "every Wednesday, running the workshop." "I know," Michael said. "Olivia told me." "She told you. She tells me things," Michael said simply. "She mentioned it." "What did she say?" Another pause. The kind Michael did when he was deciding how honest to be. "She said you're good with people, that the workshop's picked up, that people are showing up." A beat. "She said Emma sounds like a great kid." Daniel's chest did something complicated. "She hasn't met Emma," he said. "No," Michael said. "But you talk about her." He hadn't realized how much he'd talked about Emma to Olivia until Michael said it. And then it was obvious, of course, he had, because Emma was the most important thing in his life. And when you're talking to someone you actually trust, the most important things surface naturally, the way water finds its level. "Michael," Daniel said. "Yeah." Does she... He stopped, tried again. "Is there someone in her life, Olivia? Is there someone..." Silence on the other end. Long enough that Daniel started to feel the particular discomfort of a man who has just made himself vulnerable to a question that might not have the answer he's hoping for. "No," Michael said finally. "There's nobody." "Okay," Daniel said. "Daniel." "Yeah." "I already told you she doesn't do things halfway," Michael said. "I'm telling you again." "I heard you the first time." "I know you heard me," Michael said. "I'm not sure you understood me. She got hurt before, a few years back. Guy she was with for 2 years decided she wasn't what he wanted and told her so in a way that..." He stopped. "She's not fragile, don't get that wrong, but she's careful now. She's very careful about who she lets in." Daniel thought about Olivia sitting across a kitchen table from a stranger with boxes on his porch and asking him if he was actually okay. He thought about a woman who spent her days helping people rebuild their lives and still somehow found extra to give on Wednesday evenings, showing up with coffee in a cardboard carrier with 1 extra cup for the person she'd miscounted. "She let me in the first day," Daniel said quietly. Silence. "I know," Michael said. And the way he said it, not surprised, something more like resolved, told Daniel that this conversation had been coming for longer than either of them had acknowledged. "I don't want to mess this up," Daniel said. "I don't want to mess us up, you and me, if it..." "Daniel," Michael said. "Stop." A pause. "You're my friend. She's my sister. If something good happened because you knocked on that door, that's not a mess. That's just..." He seemed to search for the word. "That's just life doing the thing it does sometimes when you let it." He hung up that night and sat in the kitchen for a long time. He wasn't going to say anything to Olivia. Not yet. Not until he was sure he had something real to offer, and not just the gratitude of a man who'd been in the dark long enough to mistake the first light for something more than it was. He needed to be sure. He was going to take his time. He lasted 6 days. The following Wednesday, Marcus brought his girlfriend to the workshop. She was 21 and quiet, and stood near the door for the first half hour, watching Marcus explain the Civic's transmission to Ray, with the confidence of someone who had genuinely learned something and was proud of it. And Daniel watched Marcus explaining, watched him use the language, hold the tool correctly, walk through the logic in the right order, and felt something that he recognized after a moment as pride. Not the complicated pride of being responsible for someone. The cleaner kind. The kind you feel when something you planted takes root on its own. Olivia was there for the end of it. She came in while Marcus was mid-explanation and stood near Daniel without interrupting, and when Marcus finished and his girlfriend said, "Baby, I had no idea you knew all that," Marcus grinned and said, "Coach taught me," and Daniel said for the 100th time, "Stop calling me Coach." And everyone in the room laughed. It was a good room. It had become a good room over these weeks, and Daniel was aware with the particular awareness of someone who had been absent from goodness long enough to recognize it acutely when it returned, that he had helped make it that way, and that the making of it had done something to him in return. After everyone left, Olivia was writing in her notebook near the window, and Daniel was hanging tools on the pegboard, and the room had that settled quality it got at the end of Wednesdays, familiar and quiet. "Denise's daughter is coming back next week," Olivia said without looking up. "Sophie, she asked if she could come every week." "She took apart an entire alternator last week," Daniel said. "She put it back together in 9 minutes. She's 12. "I know," Olivia said. "Denise called me about it. She was—" A pause. "She cried a little on the phone. Happy crying. She said Sophie came home and showed her dad, her ex, a video of herself putting it back together. He didn't respond. And Sophie said, 'That's okay. Coach Daniel said the machine doesn't care about who believes in you. It just cares if you know what you're doing.'" Daniel stopped. He turned around. "She said that to you, word for word," Olivia said. He stood there for a second, holding a socket wrench, not entirely sure what to do with what was happening in his chest. "I said that," he said. "I said something like that to Marcus 2 weeks ago. She was in the room." "She was listening," Olivia said. "Kids always are," he said. "Even when you think they aren't." Olivia looked up from her notebook then. She looked at him with those steady, direct eyes and said, "Emma's lucky." "I think it's the other way," he said. "It can be both," she said. "It usually is." He set the socket wrench down on the bench. He turned to face her fully. And the thing that had been building since October, since the engine turned over in the garage, since Michael's phone call, since 6 days of telling himself to be patient and careful, and sure it came up through him, and refused to stay down. "I'd like to take you to dinner," he said. Olivia went very still. Not a flinching kind of still. Not the still of someone caught off guard in a bad way. More like the still of someone who has been expecting a particular thing for a while, and now that it has arrived is taking a deliberate moment to receive it correctly. "Dinner," she said. "Yeah," he said. "Not here. Not coffee in your kitchen." He paused. "Although I liked the coffee in your kitchen. But somewhere intentional. Just you and me." She looked at him for a long moment. "Daniel," she said. "I need to say something first." "Okay," he said. His pulse was doing something inconvenient. "I know what the last few years have been for you," she said. "I don't mean I understand it fully. I don't. But I know loss, and I know what it does to people. And I know that sometimes when things start feeling better, the first person who makes you feel better can seem like more than they are. And I need you to be sure." "Olivia," he said. "Let me finish," she said, and her voice was steady but not hard. "Honest. I need you to be sure that what you're feeling isn't just relief. That I'm not just the person who happened to open the door at the right moment. Because I—" A pause. Something shifted behind her eyes. "I can't be someone's recovery project. I've been that before. I can't do it again." The room was very quiet. Daniel understood then what Michael had meant. He understood it in full, not as a warning, but as context, the shape of something that had happened to her, the specific hurt of being someone's placeholder for healing, and not their actual choice. He took a breath. "Here's what I know," he said. I know that I've had a reason to get out of bed on Thursday mornings for 6 weeks because I knew Wednesday was coming. I know that when Emma said I hum while I cook dinner on Wednesday nights, she said I don't do it any other night. I didn't think about the workshop. I thought about you. He stopped. I know that Michael told me to be careful, and I've been trying to be careful. I've been patient. I've waited. I've watched what I feel to see if it changes or goes away. He held her gaze. It doesn't go away. Olivia didn't respond immediately. She looked at him with the particular attention of a woman who has learned to read beneath the surface of things and is reading now carefully for what is true. Okay, she said finally. Okay, he said. Okay, she said again, and the word was quiet, but it was solid, the way foundations are solid, not loud, not announced, but something you could build on. She looked back at her notebook. She wrote something. Saturday, she said. Not this Saturday. Next, Emma will need a sitter. Mrs. Callahan, he said immediately. Olivia looked up. You already planned this. I thought ahead, he said. She shook her head. A small thing, like she was trying to decide something. Then she said, I'll be ready at 7, and stood up and gathered her things, and Daniel felt the specific, long-absent feeling of anticipation, not anxiety, not dread, not the braced-for-impact feeling of waiting for something bad, but the forward-leaning feeling of something coming that you actually want. She was almost to the door when she stopped. Daniel, she said without turning. Yeah, it doesn't go away for me either, she said, and then she was gone. He stood alone in the workshop, in a silence that felt entirely different from any silence he'd been alone in for 3 years. He turned off the lights. He walked down the hall. He got into his truck. He didn't sit for 7 minutes this time. He sat for 30 seconds, and he was smiling. And he was aware that he was smiling, and for the first time in longer than he could accurately calculate, he did not feel the need to talk himself out of it. He drove home. He picked up Emma from Mrs. Callahan's. His daughter climbed in the back seat, settled her backpack, and looked at him in the rearview mirror. You're smiling, she said. Am I? Yeah, she said. Are you humming? Not yet, he said. You will be, Emma said, with the certainty of a 7-year-old who has observed patterns and trusts her data. She was right. He was humming before he reached the end of the block. He did not tell Emma about dinner plans. Not that night. He needed to sit with it first to let it be real and specific, and his before it became part of the story Emma was watching. She had been watching him carefully for 3 years, this kid who came out knowing things as Olivia had said, and she deserved to see him do this right. That meant taking it one step at a time. That meant Saturday. Saturday arrived, the way significant days always do, too fast and too slow. At the same time, the week itself unremarkable, and the morning so ordinary it almost felt like a test. Daniel dropped Emma at Mrs. Callahan's at 6:30. Emma had asked earlier that afternoon where he was going. Dinner, he said. With who? He'd hesitated for just a second. A friend, he said. Emma had regarded him with those eyes. A friend from the workshop. Yes, he said. Is it the lady? Emma asked. He stared at her. What lady? The one you talk about, Emma said. Olivia. His daughter was 7 years old, and she had been assembled from parts that were too perceptive for his comfort. We're having dinner, he said. Okay, Emma said. You should wear the blue shirt, the dark one. You're 7, he said. I know, she said. Dark blue. He wore the dark blue shirt. He drove to Olivia's her own apartment, now a place she'd moved to 2 years ago, not the family house, and he knocked on her door at 7 on the dot, and when she opened it, he understood immediately that whatever he'd been telling himself about managing his feelings and being careful and taking things one step at a time was going to require more work than he'd budgeted for. She was wearing a dark red dress, and her hair was down, not in the knot she wore to work, and she looked like herself, which was the thing. the particular thing that got him every time not performed or constructed, but simply herself, warm and direct and entirely comfortable in her own skin. "You're on time," she said. "You thought I wouldn't be," he said. "I thought you might sit in your truck for a while first," she said. "I only sat for 45 seconds," he said. "Progress," she said, and smiled, and picked up her jacket from the chair by the door. They went to a place on Fifth that was small and not too loud, the kind of restaurant that didn't try to be more than it was good food, good light tables far enough apart that you could actually talk. Daniel had looked it up and read the reviews twice, and then told himself he was overthinking a dinner reservation and done it anyway. They ordered. They talked. Not carefully, not the way people talk when they're trying to make a good impression, but the way they'd talked in the workshop and in the kitchen 6 weeks ago, directly, honestly, following the thread, wherever it led. She told him about growing up as Michael's older sister, which had meant being responsible in ways that a kid shouldn't have to be responsible, because their father had worked double shifts, and their mother had been managing her own health for years. She told him about deciding at 19 that she wanted to work with people, not because she had some grand vision of what that meant, but because she understood from the inside how much it mattered to have someone in your corner when the walls were closing in. She told him about the man who had hurt her, not in detail, not as a wound she needed to display, but as a fact she was choosing to be honest about. His name was not important. What was important was that she had believed for 2 years that she was someone who was being chosen, and had found out eventually that she was being used as a way station while he figured out what he actually wanted. "I wasn't the destination," she said. "I was just where he stayed while he was deciding. His loss," Daniel said, and meant it completely. "It was," she said. "I know that now. I didn't for a while." She picked up her glass. "Took me a long time to stop being careful in ways that kept good things out." He looked at her across the table. "What made you stop?" She met his eyes. "A man came to my door with 6 boxes he didn't want to be carrying anymore," she said. "And he looked like someone who had been carrying things alone for too long, and something in me just couldn't pretend not to see it." Daniel was quiet. "I wasn't looking for anything," he said. "I want you to know that. I was just trying to get through the day." "I know," she said. "That's how it goes usually. The things that matter don't announce themselves." He thought about Lauren. He thought about the morning the doctor came out of the room and everything rearranged. He thought about the version of himself that had been assembled in the years since functional forward moving, reduced but not broken. He thought about Emma saying you hum on Wednesday nights. "I'm not over losing her," he said. He needed to say it. Not as a warning, not as a condition, but as a true thing between them. "I don't think I will be exactly. It's more like it changed shape. Became something I carry instead of something that's carrying me." "I know," Olivia said. "I'm not looking for someone to replace her," he said. "I'm not looking for that. What I'm looking for is..." He stopped, found it. "Someone to build something new with. Something that's ours, not a replacement, a different thing entirely." Olivia was very still. "That's the right answer," she said quietly. "It's not an answer," he said. "It's just true." She looked at him for a long time. Long enough that the moment became something held deliberately, something that both of them could feel. "Okay, Daniel Brooks," she said. "Okay," he said. "Okay." She said again the same way she'd said it in the workshop, solid and buildable. "Let's build something." He drove her home at 10:30. They stood at her door, and he thought about the night 3 years ago when he last stood at a door that mattered, which had been a hospital door, which had been the end of something. And now, here was another door, a different one, with a different woman and a different kind of threshold. And he understood for the first time in his body, and not just his mind, that doors could be both things, endings and beginnings, sometimes simultaneously. He kissed her. Briefly, honestly. The way you do something that has been a long time coming, and you want to do it right. She looked at him afterward and said, "Emma's going to find out." "Emma already knows," he said. Olivia laughed that quick, real laugh he'd been cataloging since the first morning and shook her head and said goodnight. He drove home with both hands on the wheel and the windows cracked despite the October cold. Because he needed the air, needed the realness of it, the night and the road, and the fact that he was here in it alive and choosing and present in a way he hadn't been in years. He picked up Emma from Mrs. Callahan's. His daughter looked at him the way she always did, measuring logging, and said, "You're happy." "Yeah," he said. "Is it Olivia?" she asked. "Emma." "Daddy?" she said. Not impatient, just direct the way she was direct about everything. "Is it Olivia?" He looked at his daughter in the rearview mirror, this 7-year-old person who had kept him in the world, who had been smarter than him since she was 4, who had noticed that he hummed on Wednesday nights even when he didn't know he was doing it. "Yeah," he said. "It's Olivia." Emma nodded. She looked out the window. "I want to meet her," she said. "I know," he said. "Soon," Emma said. "Yeah," he said. "Soon." He drove home through the October dark, and Emma fell asleep in the back seat, the way she sometimes did on late nights, her head against the window, her breathing slow. And Daniel drove in the specific silence of a man who has something to protect and something to look forward to at the same time, which is not the same as being happy exactly, but is something adjacent to it that might be better because happiness can be fragile and brief. But the feeling of having something worth protecting, worth building, worth showing up for every single day, that he was beginning to understand was the thing underneath happiness, the foundation of it. He carried Emma inside without waking her. He put her to bed. He stood in the doorway. He did not say, "We're going to be okay this time." He said quietly to her sleeping shape, "We're getting there, baby." And he meant every word. 2 weeks later, Olivia Turner met Emma Brooks in the parking lot of the Riverside Community Center on a Saturday afternoon, because Emma had asked to see the workshop, and Daniel had thought that was the right place, the right context where the best of him had been coming back together. Emma walked into the workshop and looked at everything with the concentrated focus of someone conducting an inspection. She ran a hand along the bench. She looked at the tool wall. She picked up a wrench the right way instinctively and set it back down. Then she turned and looked at Olivia. Olivia looked back at her with that same direct, genuinely interested attention that she gave every person she encountered, and said, "Your dad says you're smarter than him." Emma considered this seriously. "I'm smarter in some ways," she said. "He's smarter about engines." "That's a fair assessment," Olivia said. Emma nodded. She seemed to be running some internal calculation. "He hums on Wednesday nights," she said. Olivia glanced at Daniel. He looked at the ceiling. "I didn't know that," Olivia said. "He didn't either," Emma said. "I told him." Olivia crouched down to Emma's level, which was the right move. The unself-conscious move of someone who had spent years with families and children and understood that respect didn't have a height requirement. "What do you think of the workshop?" she asked. Emma looked around again. "I think it's good," she said. "I think my dad needed somewhere to go." Daniel's throat tightened so fast he almost coughed. "He did," Olivia said quietly. "And now he helps other people get somewhere too." Emma looked at Daniel. It was a look he would remember for the rest of his life, something in it that was beyond 7 years old, something that understood more than he'd ever consciously taught her, because the truth was, she had been learning from him constantly, even in the hard years. Even in the reduced years, she had been watching him survive and had stored that away as knowledge. "That's good, Daddy," she said simply. He nodded. He didn't trust his voice for a second. Then Emma turned back to Olivia and said, "Can you show me how that works?" Pointing at the alternator on the bench, Denise's daughter Sophie had disassembled it perfectly and left it in pieces for the next session. "I can try," Olivia said. "Your dad's better at explaining it." "Then you both show me," Emma said, and so they did. The 3 of them stood at the bench in the Saturday afternoon light, and Daniel explained the alternator. and Olivia asked the questions that kept Emma engaged, and Emma put the first piece back together without being told how, and then looked up with a grin that was her mother's grin all the way to the bone, and Daniel felt it, the complicated, layered, bittersweet fullness of a moment that held grief and hope in the same breath that held past and present together. Without asking you to choose, that was exactly what it was. A man and his daughter and a woman who had opened a door standing around a workbench on a Saturday building something, not a replacement, not a recovery. Something new, something theirs. November came in hard that year. Cold faster than anyone expected, the kind of cold that gets into the bones of old houses and old trucks and old grief that you thought you'd outrun. Daniel noticed it the morning he drove Emma to school, and she said out of nowhere, "Is Olivia going to be at Thanksgiving?" He kept his eyes on the road. "We haven't talked about Thanksgiving." "Why not?" Emma asked. "Because it's 3 weeks away," he said. "That's not very far," Emma said. He didn't answer, and Emma, being Emma, understood that the conversation was over for now and filed it somewhere internal for later use. She got out at school, kissed him on the cheek, and walked in without looking back, her backpack bouncing her small shoulders, carrying their own particular certainty. Daniel sat in the drop-off lane for 30 seconds longer than he needed to. He and Olivia had been, he wasn't sure what word to use. Together felt too defined. Dating felt too casual. What they were was two people who talked every day, who had dinner twice a week, who stood in the workshop on Wednesdays, side by side, in the way that people stand when they've stopped being careful about proximity. What they were was real, but they hadn't named it fully, and Daniel was aware that the naming of things made them subject to loss, and some part of him was still protecting against that, still holding the thing slightly apart from himself, so that if it broke, he wouldn't break completely. He knew that was not entirely fair. He knew Olivia knew it too. She hadn't said anything. That was the thing about her, she didn't push at the places where he was still learning to be open. She waited. Not passively, not in the martyred way of someone keeping score, but in the active, intentional way of someone who understood that trust had its own schedule, and you couldn't rush it without damaging it. But 3 weeks into November, something happened that stopped Daniel's careful, measured pace entirely. He got a phone call on a Tuesday night after Emma was in bed from a number he didn't recognize. He almost didn't answer. He answered. "Is this Daniel Brooks?" A woman's voice. Careful. Formal in the way of someone who has rehearsed the opening. "Yeah," he said. "My name is Patricia Holloway. I'm Lauren's mother." He went completely still. Lauren's mother. He hadn't spoken to her since the funeral. Lauren's parents had been, it was complicated, the way it's always complicated when a marriage ends in death instead of divorce, when there's no one to be angry at, so the grief finds other shapes. Patricia Holloway had loved her daughter, and loved Emma, and had handled Daniel with the particular brittle courtesy of a woman who was holding herself together by thread and pride, and needed to believe someone was to blame even when there was no one. They had spoken twice after the funeral. Both calls short, both calls painful. Then, silence. "Patricia," he said, "is everything okay?" "I'm calling about Emma," she said. His hand tightened on the phone. "What about Emma?" he said, and his voice came out flat and controlled, because he was a man who had learned to keep his voice flat and controlled when his body was doing something else entirely. "I'd like to see her," Patricia said. "It's been almost a year since—" A pause. He could hear her adjusting herself, pulling something back. "I know things have been difficult between us. I'm not calling to make them more difficult. She's my granddaughter. And I'm not getting younger. And I would like to see her." Daniel exhaled. He'd expected something worse. He didn't know what exactly accusation, legal language, something with edges. Instead, it was just an old woman saying she missed her granddaughter, and he could not in good conscience make that into a fight. "Okay," he said. "Let's figure something out." They talked for 20 minutes, careful circling, neither of them entirely comfortable, but both of them trying. Patricia asked about Emma's school, about whether she was eating enough vegetables, about whether she still slept with the stuffed elephant Lauren had given her at age 3. Yes, Daniel said to all of it. Before she hung up, Patricia said, I heard you've been getting out more, getting back into things. He wasn't sure how she'd heard that. The world was smaller than it seemed. I've been doing better, he said. A pause. Good, Patricia said, and her voice was smaller than the word, like the word was just the surface of something deeper that she didn't know how to access. Lauren would have wanted you to. I know she would have. He didn't speak for a moment. Thank you for saying that, he said. He hung up and sat at the kitchen table for a long time. The house was quiet around him in that late-night way, and he could hear Emma breathing through the monitor he still kept, even though she was 7 and probably too old for it. He kept it because silence made him nervous, because he'd learned the hard way that silence could mean something wrong, and he was not ready to unlearn that. He texted Olivia. Late, he knew. After 10. The text said Lauren's mom called. First time in almost a year. She wants to see Emma. 3 minutes later, his phone rang. Are you okay? Olivia said. Not what did she want or what are you going to do first. Are you okay? It was still the right question. Yeah, he said. Just caught me off guard. What did she say? He told her. All of it, including the part at the end where Patricia had said Lauren would have wanted him to be doing better. He hadn't planned to tell her that part. He told her anyway. Olivia was quiet for a moment. How do you feel about that? She said. Not clinical. Just asking. Complicated, he said. She's not wrong. She was the kind of person who would have hated watching me disappear into myself. She would have been furious at me by month 6. He paused. She had a short tolerance for self-pity. She sounds like someone worth knowing, Olivia said. Daniel closed his eyes. She was, he said. She really was. They stayed on the phone for an hour, not talking about Lauren the whole time, about other things. Easier things, work, and Emma and the workshop Marcus, having successfully sold the Civic and immediately started on a second project that was twice as ambitious. But the conversation was colored by the earlier one, soft around the edges, and at the end of it Olivia said, "Get some sleep," and Daniel said, "Yeah." And there was a moment before either of them hung up where the silence was full, in a way that silences between people who have stopped needing to fill them always are. "Olivia," he said. "I know," she said. He wasn't sure what she knew. He wasn't sure what he would have said. But it was enough. The following week, Patricia Holloway came to Nashville. She was smaller than Daniel remembered, or maybe he'd been smaller the last time he saw her, and now the difference was reversed. She sat at his kitchen table with the careful posture of a woman who wasn't sure of her welcome, and Emma came in from the backyard and stopped cold in the doorway. For 3 seconds, nobody moved. Then Emma said, "Grandma Pat," and Patricia said, "Hi, sweetheart," and her voice broke on the second word, and Emma crossed the kitchen and hugged her with the whole body commitment that children bring. To hugs the kind that doesn't hold anything back, and Daniel had to turn around and look out the window, because he was not going to cry in his own kitchen in front of his mother-in-law on a Wednesday afternoon. He pulled himself together in approximately 4 seconds. He made coffee. He sat at the table and let them talk. Emma telling Patricia about school, about the workshop, about Sophie putting the alternator back together in 9 minutes, about how she'd been learning from Coach Daniel, and Patricia listening with the focused, grateful attention of someone who has been a stranger to a child they love. At one point, Emma said, "Daddy has a friend. Her name is Olivia." Patricia looked at Daniel. Daniel looked at his coffee. "She helps people," Emma continued with the absolute neutrality of a child who doesn't register that this might be a charged subject. "She runs the community center where Daddy does the workshop. She's nice. She showed me how the alternator connects to the battery. She sounds wonderful," Patricia said, and she looked at Daniel when she said it, and Daniel met her eyes, and something passed between them. Not forgiveness exactly, not closure, but acknowledgement. The recognition that life had moved, that it was supposed to move, that the moving of it was not a betrayal. "She is," Emma said simply, already moving to the next topic. After Emma went to do homework, Patricia and Daniel sat alone with their coffee and the particular quiet of two people who had once shared someone they both loved and had never quite figured out what to do with each other since. "She's happy," Patricia said, meaning Emma. "Yeah," Daniel said. "She's a remarkable kid." "She's Lauren's kid," Patricia said. "But she's yours too." She wrapped her hands around her mug. "I haven't always been. I know I haven't been fair to you. After. I needed somewhere to put the pain, and you were available." Daniel was quiet. "You don't need to," he started. "I know I don't need to," she said. "I'm choosing to." She looked at him steadily. "You've done right by her, by Emma. I can see that, and I'm not going to pretend I saw it sooner than I did." The kitchen clock ticked. Somewhere in the house, Emma's pencil moved across paper. "She needs her grandmother," Daniel said. "She doesn't say it, but she needs it. I want her to have that." Patricia nodded. Her jaw was tight, and her eyes were bright, and she was holding herself together with the same kind of determined precision that Daniel recognized because he'd spent 3 years doing the same thing. "And this woman," Patricia said after a moment. "Olivia." "Yes," Daniel said. "Is it serious?" He thought about the word serious, about what it meant and what it required. He thought about dinner on 5th Street and the way Olivia had said, "Let's build something." He thought about Emma and the alternator, and Olivia crouching down to Emma's level without being asked. "Yes," he said. "I think it is." Patricia nodded slowly. She looked at the table. "Lauren used to say—" She stopped. Tried again. "She used to say that the worst thing anyone could do was let love scare them into loneliness. She said that to Michael at one point, actually, when he was going through that thing with—" She waved her hand. "Never mind. The point is, she believed that." She looked at him. "She would believe it for you." Daniel held that. Let it sit. Let it mean what it meant. "Thank you," he said. Patricia stayed for dinner. Emma was delighted. Daniel made the pasta that he'd been making every Tuesday for 3 years because it was the one thing he'd gotten reliably right in the kitchen, and Patricia said it was good, and Emma said it was her favorite, and the table felt for the first time not like a place where absence lived, but like a place where presence did. After Patricia left, Emma helped clear the table, and then said, "Is Grandma Pat going to come back?" "Yeah," Daniel said. "I think she is." Emma nodded. "Good," she said. "She misses Mommy a lot, you can tell." "I know," Daniel said. "Do you miss Mommy?" Emma asked the way children ask things that adults build entire architectures of avoidance around simply directly because they actually want to know. Daniel set down the plate he was holding. He crouched down to Emma's level. He looked at his daughter. "Every day," he said. "Every single day. And that's not going to stop." Emma considered this. "But you're also happy," she said. "With Olivia." "Those two things can both be true at the same time," he said. "They're supposed to be." Emma thought about this with visible seriousness. Then she said, "Okay, that makes sense." She went back to the dishes. Daniel stood up and felt something settle in him, something that had been suspended, unresolved like a note held too long. Finally land. The next Wednesday, something happened in the workshop that none of them expected. Ray Kettner came in carrying something under his right arm wrapped in an old cloth. He set it on the bench with the ceremony of a man presenting something he has made with his whole self. He unwrapped it. It was a small wooden box, handmade dovetail joints, a simple latch, smooth, solid, finished to a honey-dark shine. "My wife's birthday is Sunday," Ray said. "She's been wanting a jewelry box for 20 years. I kept saying I'd get one." He paused. "I made one." Nobody spoke for a moment. Daniel picked it up carefully and turned it in his hands. The joints were tight and true. The lid opened and closed with a satisfying click. The wood had been sanded fine enough that it felt like something expensive. "Ray," Daniel said. "One hand," Ray said, and there was something in his voice that was steel and tears in equal measure. One good hand, and the other one is a brace the way you showed me. 8 weeks. He looked at the box. She's going to lose her mind. Marcus was standing with his hands on his hips and his face doing something he was trying to control and not entirely managing. Denise said, "Ray, that is, don't." Ray said, "Don't make it a thing. I just wanted to show you before I gave it to her." Olivia was in the doorway. Daniel didn't know how long she'd been there. She was holding her notebook against her chest, and her eyes were bright. Daniel set the box down. "You should go give it to her," he said. "Yeah," Ray said. He picked it up, rewrapped it, held it under his arm again. He looked at Daniel, and something passed between them that was older and quieter than words. "Thank you," he said, "for not treating me like I was done." Daniel shook his head. "You did that," he said. "You didn't let me quit," Ray said. "That counts." He left. The workshop was quiet for a moment after the door closed. Then Marcus said, "I'm not crying," in a voice that suggested he absolutely was. "Nobody said you were," Daniel said. "Good," Marcus said. "Because I'm not." Olivia was still in the doorway. When Daniel looked at her, she had both hands pressed briefly against her mouth, and then she lowered them and took a breath and said, "Okay. Who needs what tonight?" And the room moved. That was the thing about Olivia. She could hold a moment fully and then move through it without diminishing it, and that was a skill, a real and rare one. And Daniel watched her do it and felt the specific quality of admiration that comes not from what someone is, but from who they choose to be. Later, after everyone had gone and they were locking up, Olivia said, "Did you see his face when he walked in?" "Yeah," Daniel said. "He came in 3 months ago," she said, "and he wouldn't meet anybody's eyes. He sat in the corner and watched for the first 2 sessions before he'd touch a single tool." She paused. "You changed that." "He changed it," Daniel said. "He hung the last wrench. I just stayed in the room." "Sometimes staying in the room is everything," Olivia said. He turned to look at her. She was leaning against the bench, arms crossed, watching him with that expression that he'd stopped trying to decode, because it always meant the same thing, that she was fully present, fully paying attention, fully here. "I want to talk to you about something," he said. Her expression shifted slightly. Not worried, just attentive, ready. "Patricia came," he said. "Last week." "I know, you told me." "She asked about you," he said. Olivia raised an eyebrow. "What did she ask?" "She asked if it was serious," he said. The workshop was very quiet. "What did you tell her?" Olivia said. "I told her yes," he said. "I think it is." Olivia held his gaze. "You think," she said. He exhaled. "I know it is," he said. "I'm not good at, I'm working on the not hedging thing." "I noticed," she said. "Keep working on it." "I will," he said. "I'm trying to tell you that what we're doing is not something I'm doing halfway. I know I've been careful. I know I've been slow. But it's not because I'm not sure. It's because the last time I was all in on something, it ended in a way that—" He stopped, found the words. "It took me apart. And I've been putting myself back together, and I don't want to do this wrong because I've been doing it wrong for 3 years and I'm tired of doing things wrong." Olivia uncrossed her arms. She walked to where he was standing, and she did not touch him yet. She stopped close enough that he could see everything her face was doing, and she said, "Daniel, you have not been doing it wrong. You have been doing the hardest thing there is, which is surviving something unsurvivable, and coming out the other side still capable of standing in a room with people and helping them. That is not doing it wrong." A pause. "And you haven't been doing this wrong either." "Olivia," he said. "What?" He looked at her. This woman who had opened a door expecting a handoff and had instead stood in her doorway and asked the question that nobody had asked him, and had changed without knowing she was doing it the entire direction of his life. "I love you," he said. The words came out quieter than he intended. Simpler. like they'd been waiting a long time to be said and were tired of being held in. Olivia went very still. For 3 seconds, she didn't move, didn't speak, didn't do anything except look at him with an expression that was doing several things at once. Surprise, that wasn't fully surprise, something vulnerable and enormous, something that had been tightly held, releasing its grip. Then she said, "It took you long enough." He laughed, a real laugh, sudden and involuntary, and she laughed too. And then she was close, and his hands were on her face, and he kissed her the way you kiss someone when you're not being careful anymore, when you've stopped managing the distance. She said it back, against his shoulder, quietly like something she'd also been holding, and was glad to put down. "I love you too," she said. "I have for a while." "How long?" he asked. "Since about the 3rd Wednesday," she said. "That was a month in," he said. "I know," she said. "I tried to talk myself out of it." "Did it work?" "Clearly not," she said. They stood in the workshop with the heater clicking, and the tools on the wall and the workbenches that had held over the past months. More human brokenness and rebuilding than any space that size had a right to hold. And it was ordinary. All of it. Completely ordinary. 2 people in a room, saying the true thing at last. And it was the best thing that had happened to Daniel Brooks in longer than he could account for. He drove home singing, not humming. Actually singing badly to the radio a song from years ago that he didn't even fully know the words to, and it didn't matter. He picked up Emma from Mrs. Callahan's. His daughter looked at him in the rearview mirror and said, "You're singing." "Yeah," he said. "That's different from humming," Emma said. "Yeah," he said. Emma looked out the window. Then she said, "You told her, didn't you?" "Told her what?" he said. "Daddy," Emma said. He caught her eyes in the mirror. "Yeah," he said. "I told her." Emma smiled. Not the big grin, the small private one. The one she saved for things she'd been waiting on. "Good," she said. "I told Mrs. Callahan you would eventually." "You told Mrs. Callahan about—" "She wanted to know why you've been humming," Emma said. He didn't have a response to this. He drove. Emma said, "Are you going to ask her?" "Ask her what?" Emma looked at him with the patience of a person who has been 7 years old, long enough to know when adults are being deliberately slow. "You know what," she said. He did know. He hadn't gotten there yet. He was still living inside the miracle of tonight, inside "I love you," and "I have for a while," and the rest of it, the larger question, the real question, was still ahead of him on a road he could see but hadn't started down yet. "One thing at a time," he said. Emma considered this. "Okay," she said, "but not too much time." "Why not?" "Because she's good," Emma said with absolute simplicity. "And good things don't wait forever." 7 years old. He pulled into the driveway and sat for a moment. "Where did you learn that?" he asked. Emma thought about it. "From you," she said. "You always say the good things take work, but they're worth it. You say that to the people at the workshop." He stared at his daughter. He hadn't known she'd heard that. She was always hearing things. "Come on, Daddy," she said, climbing out. "It's cold." He got out of the truck. He looked up at the sky, cold, clear stars faint but present over the Nashville suburb lights. He thought about a Saturday morning in September when he'd stood on a porch with 6 boxes and almost turned around. He thought about a door opening. He thought about 4 words that had cracked something open. He thought about Ray Kettner's jewelry box and Marcus calling him coach, and Sophie the 12-year-old and her alternator. He thought about Patricia Holloway at his kitchen table and Emma saying, "You can tell she misses Mommy." He thought about his father's workbench and the '67 Mustang engine that had turned over in October and was still running. He thought about Olivia. He went inside. He made Emma's lunch for the next day and helped her finish her homework and read to her from the book she was working through a chapter about a girl who builds a boat, and he kissed her goodnight. He went to the garage. He stood at the back corner. He opened the small wooden drawer under the workbench, the one that had been his father's, where his father kept the things that mattered. Inside was a ring. Not Lauren's ring that was in a box in the bedroom, Emma's to have someday, because it was Lauren's and it belonged to Emma's memory of her mother, and that was where it was supposed to live. This ring was his grandmother's. Small, simple. A setting that was old-fashioned in the way that things became timeless instead of dated. His mother had given it to him 3 years ago and said you'll know when. He had put it in the drawer and not opened the drawer since. He picked it up. He held it under the light. He thought about Olivia saying, "Let's build something." He thought about Emma saying good things don't wait forever. He put the ring in his pocket. He wasn't ready yet. He needed a little more time. He needed to be absolutely certain, not because he doubted his feelings, but because Olivia deserved certainty, the real kind, offered by a man who had done the work of being sure. But he was close. He could feel it. The way you feel an engine that's almost ready, everything aligned, everything turning, just waiting for the moment to come fully to life. He closed the drawer. He turned off the light. He went inside. And the house was warm and quiet, and full in a way that houses can only be when the right things are present. And he stood in the kitchen for a moment in the dark and listened to it. Not to absence. For the first time in 3 years. To presence. The ring stayed in his jacket pocket for 11 days. He carried it everywhere. Not because he was ready, every moment of those 11 days. There were hours when he'd reach into his pocket, feel the small weight of it, and pull his hand back out, empty. Telling himself he needed one more day, one more week, one more moment of being absolutely certain. And then there were other hours when the certainty was so complete and so quiet that it felt less like a decision and more like something that had already happened, that he was simply catching up to. Emma knew it was there. He didn't tell her. He was 90% sure she knew anyway. She had stopped mentioning it after that night in the truck, which meant she was being strategic, which meant she absolutely knew, because Emma only went quiet about things she was actively managing. The workshop on the second Wednesday of December was the fullest it had ever been. Marcus brought 2 friends guys from his old manufacturing job who'd been laid off the same month he was and hadn't found their footing yet. They came in with their hands in their pockets and their eyes doing the thing eyes do when you're in a new place and you're not sure if you belong. Tracking exits, measuring the room, waiting for someone to tell you you're in the wrong place. Daniel looked at them and thought about himself in September standing on Olivia's porch with his arms full of someone else's past. He walked over and said, "Either of you ever taken apart an engine? One of them tall kid, maybe 25, name turned out to be Jerome, said, 'My uncle had a shop. I used to watch.'" "Watching's the first half," Daniel said. "Come here." That was it. No speech, no orientation, just an invitation to come stand at a bench and do something real. Ray was there. He'd brought the photograph his wife had taken of him holding the jewelry box, her expression in the background of the photomouth open hand over her heart, the full-body reaction of a woman receiving something she had long stopped expecting. He passed his phone around the room and didn't say anything about it. Just let people see. Denise's daughter Sophie was there. She had started bringing a small notebook of her own where she drew diagrams of the things she learned, not the way the manuals drew them in clean technical lines, but in her own hand, with notes in the margins and small arrows connecting things in the way her 12-year-old brain made sense of them. Daniel had looked at that notebook once over her shoulder and felt something shift in his chest, the specific, solemn recognition of a mind that was going to go somewhere. "Sophie," he said, "what do you want to be when you grow up?" She didn't look up from her notebook. "An engineer," she said. "Mechanical, or maybe aerospace. I haven't decided which kind of machine I like best yet." He looked at Denise, who was smiling with the specific pride of a parent who has watched their child find themselves. "A year ago," Denise said quietly, "she wanted to be a nail technician. Not that there's anything wrong with that. But she said it because she didn't think she was allowed to want anything that involved math." Daniel thought about that, about what it cost a child to be told not in words, but in the 100 small signals the world sends that certain things were not for them. About what it meant to give someone a bench and a tool and the space to find out what they were capable of. He thought about his father. He thought about the Saturday mornings when he was 9 years old, and the garage smelled like oil and cold air, and the radio played country music softly in the background, and his father had said the first time Daniel successfully reassembled a carburetor. You see, you already knew how. You just didn't know that you knew. He hadn't thought about that memory in years. It came back now clean and specific the way memories do when they've been waiting for the right moment to surface. Olivia was at the doorway. She'd come in halfway through and taken her usual position, not hovering, not interfering, just present. She caught his eye across the room, and something passed between them that was comfortable now. Familiar, the kind of wordless communication that builds between people who have been paying close attention to each other for long enough. He looked at her and thought tonight. He looked back at Jerome, who had just successfully identified a cracked distributor cap without being told what he was looking for, who was holding it up and saying, "Wait, this is why it wouldn't start," with the specific, incredulous joy of someone who has just understood something for the first time. "That's exactly why," Daniel said. "I've been trying to get that truck running for 8 months, Jerome said. 8 months. It was this. It was that, Daniel said. Jerome looked at the distributor cap. He looked at Daniel. "Man," he said, and then didn't have more words, which was its own kind of eloquence. After, when the room had cleared, and Olivia was making her notes, and the tools were back on the pegboard, and the workshop had settled into its end of Wednesday quiet, Daniel stood at the bench and didn't start toward the door. Olivia looked up. "You're not moving," she said. "No," he said. She closed her notebook. She set it on the bench. She looked at him with full attention, the complete, undivided kind she brought to everything that mattered, and waited. He reached into his jacket pocket. He felt the ring. He left it there. Not yet. Not in the workshop, not at the end of a workday with grease on his hands and the fluorescent lights humming overhead. Not here. "Come somewhere with me," he said. "Right now," she said. "Yeah," he said. "Right now." She picked up her jacket without asking where or why, which was so entirely her that he had to stop himself from saying it right there after all. They drove to the park on Shelby Street. It was cold, genuinely cold now. December cold, the kind that makes the air taste clean. The park was mostly empty at 8:30 on a Wednesday night, just the lights along the path and the occasional dog walker moving through the dark. They walked. Not fast, not with a destination. Just walked side by side close enough that their arms touched, and Daniel felt the ring in his pocket with every step, and felt also underneath the nerves and the weight of what he was about to do, the absolute steadiness of knowing it was right. He had been afraid of this. He had been afraid of it for 11 days in the way you're afraid of heights. Not because you don't want to be at the top, but because the falling is real, and the memory of falling is in your body. And your body doesn't always distinguish between the fall that hurt you and the one you haven't taken yet. But he had spent 4 months in a room full of people who had fallen, who had been broken by injury and loss and failure, and the particular cruelty of a world that doesn't always give you what you were counting on, and every single one of them had gotten up. Not all the way, not all at once, not without the kind of help that required other people to believe in them when they couldn't believe in themselves. But up. Ray Kettner had made a jewelry box with one hand. Sophie was going to be a mechanical engineer. Jerome had found a cracked distributor cap after 8 months. And Daniel Brooks, who had stood in a driveway for 11 minutes, unable to move on a September morning, who had carried boxes that felt like the weight of everything he'd given up. Daniel Brooks was standing in a park in December with a ring in his pocket and a woman beside him who had opened a door and refused to look away. He stopped walking. Olivia stopped too. She turned to look at him. "Daniel," she said, reading his face the way she'd been reading his face since the first morning. "What's happening?" "I need to say something," he said. "Okay," she said. Her voice was steady, but her eyes had gone watchful, that particular attention she reserved for moments that were about to be real. "I had a plan," he said, "for how to do this. I was going to find the right moment, the right place I was going to." He stopped. But then I thought about what you told me the first day, about how you spent your career helping people and how you got good at hearing what people weren't saying. And I realized I've been not saying this for 11 days. Olivia went completely still. Daniel, she said, and her voice was different now. He reached into his pocket. He brought out the ring. He held it in his palm between them, and it caught the light from the path, and he saw her see. It watched her face move through recognition and disbelief, and something enormous that she pressed her free hand to her mouth to contain. My grandmother's, he said. My mother gave it to me 3 years ago and said I'd know when. He looked at her. She was right. I know. Olivia's hand was still over her mouth. Her eyes were bright, and he could see her breathing carefully, deliberately, the way you breathe when you are holding something very large. I'm not the man I was before I lost Lauren, he said. I'm not the version of me that existed in a world where nothing had broken yet. I'm this version. The one that broke and got put back together imperfectly with the seams showing. And I'm still learning how to not hold things at a distance. I'm still learning how to want things without bracing for them to end. He paused. But I know who you are. I know what you've done, not just for me, not just for Emma, for Ray and Marcus and Denise and Sophie, and every person who came through that workshop looking for something they couldn't name. I know that you see people. Really see them. And I know that being seen by you. His voice went slightly unsteady and he held it. Being seen by you is the thing that brought me back. Olivia lowered her hand from her mouth. Her face was completely open. No composure. No managing, just her entirely present, entirely real. You came to return some boxes, she said, and her voice was barely above a breath. I came to return some boxes, he said. And you opened the door. A sound came out of her that was almost a laugh and almost something else. Something that couldn't decide which kind of overwhelmed it was. Olivia Marie Turner, he said. Will you? Yes, she said. I haven't finished asking, he said. Yes, she said again, and this time she was crying actual tears, which he had never seen her do in 4 months of knowing her, and it was the most honest thing he'd ever witnessed. Will you marry me? He finished. Daniel, she said. Yes, yes. He put the ring on her finger. It fit. His grandmother's ring on Olivia Turner's hand, and he stood up, and she put both hands on his face and kissed him the way you kiss someone when you've been waiting for something to be real, and it finally is, completely and without condition. They stood on the path in the December cold for a long time. Then Olivia pulled back and looked at him and said, Emma knows, doesn't she? She's known for at least a week, Daniel said. Olivia shook her head. That kid. I know, he said. Michael's going to lose his mind, she said. In a good way. In the best way, she said. He's been waiting for you to do this longer than you have. Daniel laughed. He felt light in a way that wasn't the absence of weight he was still carrying. Everything he'd always carried, Lauren and grief and the years of getting through, but weight distributed differently, held differently, not alone. He called Emma from the park. She picked up on the second ring, which meant she'd been waiting. Hey, baby, he said. Hi, Daddy, Emma said. Her voice was the studied casualness of a child performing normalcy. You awake, he said. I couldn't sleep, she said. He said. Emma. Yeah. I asked her, he said. A pause. 2 seconds. Then Emma said in a voice that cracked apart completely at the seams. What did she say? She said yes, Daniel said. The sound Emma made on the other end of the phone was not a word. It was the sound of a 7-year-old girl who had been hoping for something she was afraid to fully hope for and had just found out she was allowed to have it. It was high and involuntary and completely unguarded, and it reached through the phone and into Daniel's chest and took hold of something there. Olivia heard it. She pressed her face against Daniel's shoulder. Tell her I love her, Olivia said. She says she loves you, Daniel said into the phone. Emma sniffled. Tell her I love her too, Emma said. And tell her I called it. Daniel laughed. She says she called it. Of course she did, Olivia said. They drove to Mrs. Callahan's to pick up Emma. Emma came out of the house the moment the truck pulled up, still in her pajamas, coat thrown over the top, and she actually ran flat out across the lawn, and Daniel caught her and she wrapped around him and then immediately pulled back and grabbed Olivia's hand and looked at the ring. It's pretty, Emma said. Your great-great-grandmother's, Daniel said. Emma looked at it carefully, then she looked at Olivia. You can wear it forever, she said. We're keeping you. Olivia made a sound that was completely undone and pulled Emma into a hug, and Emma hugged her back with both arms, and Daniel stood in the cold December night and looked at the two of them and thought about a September morning when he had been reduced to the smallest version of himself, when he had sat in his truck for 11 minutes, unable to move, when he had carried boxes he didn't want to carry to a door he almost didn't knock on. He thought about what was on the other side of that door. He thought about what was on the other side of every door you almost don't open. Michael called the next morning before Daniel had finished his coffee. She texted me a photo, Michael said. No greeting, no preamble. Of the ring, at 11:30 last night. I figured, Daniel said. I've been awake since 11:30, Michael said. I'm sorry, Daniel said. I'm not, Michael said, and his voice had that quality Daniel recognized from the phone call months ago. The one where Michael had said, if something good happened, because you knocked on that door, resolved, settled like something long held, had finally been put down correctly. I'm really not. They talked for 20 minutes. About dates and logistics and nothing important. The kind of conversation that is really about something else entirely, about friendship, that had crossed a line into family, about the strange and unrepeatable luck of a Saturday morning and a wrong door that turned out to be the right one. You know what the funny thing is? Michael said near the end. I was going to pick up those boxes myself. I'd arranged it. Then the Denver thing came up last minute, and I thought I'll just have her there when Daniel comes by. She can let him in. Easy. Daniel stopped. You sent me there on purpose, he said. A pause. I sent you there because I needed someone to pick up my stuff, Michael said very carefully. Michael. Another pause. Longer. I may have thought, Michael said, that you and Olivia might, that there was a chance. He stopped. She'd been going through a rough stretch. You'd been going through a rough stretch. And I thought if there was one person I knew who would, I don't know, see her, the way she deserved to be seen. Daniel was quiet for a long time. You set me up, he said. I gave you boxes to return, Michael said. What you did with the door was entirely your business. He hung up and sat with his coffee and laughed, really laughed, the long, full, helpless kind, for the first time in longer than he could account for. The community center held its end-of-year gathering 2 weeks later. Not a ceremony, not a formal event. Just an afternoon where everyone who had come through the center that year, the families, the veterans, the workshop, regulars, the support group, people, the staff came together in the main hall with food and noise, and the particular warmth of a room full of people who have been through something together. Ray came with his wife, Carol. She was wearing the jewelry box's contents, a small pearl necklace, an anniversary gift from years ago. She shook Daniel's hand and said, He talks about you like you're his son. And Daniel had to look at the ceiling for a second. Marcus came with his girlfriend and the finished Civic's keys dangling from his hand. She passed inspection, he announced to the room, holding the keys up, and a cheer went up from the people who had watched that car go from hopeless to roadworthy over 3 months. Sophie came with Denise. She brought her notebook. She showed it to Daniel without saying anything, opened to a new page where she'd drawn in careful detail a diagram of an aerospace engine. Not a real one, not one from a textbook. One she'd designed herself with annotations in the margins in her small handwriting, questions and guesses and arrows pointing to things she was still working out. Is this right? She asked. He looked at it for a long time. Some of it is, he said. Some of it is wrong in interesting ways. The interesting wrong ways are worth keeping. She nodded seriously and wrote something in the margin. Jerome came. He'd fixed his uncle's truck, the 8-month mystery solved with a distributor cap, and driven it to the gathering to show anyone who wanted to see it. He pulled Daniel aside and said, "I called my uncle this morning. First time in 2 years. We're going to work on a second vehicle together this spring." He paused. "I don't know if that would have happened without this." Daniel shook his head. "You called him," he said. "That was you. You gave me the language," Jerome said. "You gave me something to bring to him, a reason to call." Daniel didn't argue with that. He was learning slowly to let people give him credit for things he'd actually done. Emma was there. She had not left Olivia's side for the majority of the afternoon, which Olivia navigated with a grace that Daniel watched in a kind of continuous quiet amazement. She did not smother, did not perform, did not try to be anything other than exactly what she was, which was a woman who genuinely liked his daughter, and Emma, who could identify performance in 4 seconds flat, had registered this from the beginning. At one point, Emma took Olivia's hand, just reached up and took it, the way children do when they've decided something. And Olivia looked down and then looked at Daniel across the room, and something happened in her face that she didn't try to hide. Patricia Holloway had come. That was the thing Daniel hadn't expected. He'd mentioned the gathering to her in one of their weekly calls. They'd been talking once a week since November. Short calls, careful calls, but real ones, and she'd said she'd think about it, and he hadn't pushed. She was there at 2:30, standing near the door with her coat on, and a look that said she wasn't entirely sure she should have come, and Daniel crossed the room to meet her and said, "I'm glad you're here," and meant it. She saw Emma across the room holding Olivia's hand. She stopped. She watched them for a long moment. Two people who were becoming a family, his daughter and the woman he was going to marry, standing together in a room full of people who had been broken and rebuilt. Patricia's jaw was tight. Her eyes were doing the thing eyes did when they were choosing not to spill over. "She looks like Lauren," Patricia said quietly. "Emma, the way she stands." "I know," Daniel said. "And she looks happy," Patricia said. "She is," Daniel said. Patricia nodded slowly. She was still watching Emma. "Lauren would have liked this," she said. "All of this." She paused. "She would have liked her." Daniel looked at Olivia across the room. Olivia, who was leaning down to hear something Emma was saying, who was laughing at whatever it was, who was wearing his grandmother's ring on her hand, and had said yes before he finished asking. "Yeah," he said. "She would have." Patricia reached out and put her hand on his arm. Brief, firm. The kind of touch that says more than the words that go with it. "Be happy, Daniel," she said. "That's all. Just be happy." He covered her hand with his. "I'm working on it," he said. She nodded once and straightened up and moved toward Emma, and Emma saw her coming and left Olivia's side and went to her grandmother, and Daniel watched his daughter take Patricia Holloway's hand too, one on each side, connecting the past and the present in her small, certain grip. He stood in the middle of that room and felt the full weight of the afternoon land on him, not heavy, not crushing, but substantial. Real. The weight of a life that had come back to itself. He thought about September, about boxes, about the driveway. He thought about 11 minutes. He thought about what those 11 minutes had almost cost him. Ray found him near the end of the afternoon. They stood together without needing to manufacture conversation, two men who had found in each other the particular comfort of understanding without requiring explanation. "You did something here," Ray said, looking around the room. "We did something here," Daniel said. Ray shook his head. "You started it," he said. "You showed up. That's what started it." "Olivia started it," Daniel said. "Olivia built the place," Ray said. "You filled it." He paused. "There's a difference." Daniel didn't argue. He looked at Olivia across the room. She was talking to Denise and laughing, and her hands were moving the way they did when she was telling a story, and the ring caught the light, and she was so entirely herself that it's still months, in months of Wednesdays and dinners and late phone calls, and the slow, careful business of two people choosing each other still made him catch his breath. She looked up the way she sometimes did when he was looking at her from a distance, like she felt it. She smiled. Not the professional smile, not the composed one. The real one, the one that started in her eyes. He smiled back. And across a room full of people who had been lost and had been found, who had built things with their hands and their hearts, and the stubborn human refusal to stay broken. Daniel. Brooks smiled at the woman who had opened a door when she didn't have to, who had asked the right question when nobody else thought to ask it, who had looked at a man carrying more than boxes and chosen to see not what he'd lost, but what he still had. He thought about his father at the workbench on a Saturday morning, about the engine in his garage that had turned over in October and kept running, about Emma saying you hum on Wednesday nights, about Ray's jewelry box and Sophie's notebook, and Jerome calling his uncle after 2 years of silence, about boxes delivered to a door he almost didn't knock on, about 4 words spoken by a woman he had never met on a September morning that had cracked something open in his chest and let the light back in. He had come to return someone else's things. He had found everything that was his. That was the truth of it, plain and unglamorous, and as solid as the workbench in the room on 4th Street where people came every Wednesday to remember what they were made of. That was the truth of what happened when a man who had learned to make himself small enough to survive finally stopped surviving and started one Wednesday at a time, one honest conversation at a time, one door at a time to live. Daniel Brooks had driven across Nashville with 6 boxes on a September morning, expecting nothing. He drove home that December evening with his daughter asleep in the back seat, his future wife's number lit up on his phone, with a goodnight text and the absolute bone-deep, hard-won knowledge that the life he was living was the one he was supposed to have. Not the one before the loss. Not the smaller one after it. This one, the new one. The one built from what remained by hands that had learned the hard way, and the right way, that the most important thing you could do with broken pieces was not throw them away. It was figure out what they could become.